Unit circle and basic trig. All right, in this video, we're gonna discuss the unit circle. The unit circle is something that you need to memorize. Right? You need to learn it. You need to love it, or love to hate it. But you need to know this unit circle like you know the back of your hand. Right? And that's not a joke. You need to know the unit circle. All right, so starting off, the unit circle is a circle with a radius of 1. So this is 1, this is 1. All right, since this is your x and your y axis, this would be -1, and this would be -1 as well. All right, so it is a circle centered at the origin with a radius of 1. Now, any given point on this circle will have an x and a y axis. All right, it will have an x and a y coordinate. So just like here, all right, it's going to have an x and a y coordinate. All right, this is your angle. We'll call it alpha. Okay. Now, the unit circle is very important in trig because if you remember the unit circle, radian measure is a breeze. Seriously. Radian measure and finding, well, let me rephrase that. Trig paired with radian measure is a breeze. It is so easy and simple. For instance, say our angle here, theta, was 45 degrees, which is pi over 4. All right, which is pi over 4. That automatically tells me that the x value and the y value for this is the square root of 2 over 2. And the and the y value is also square root of 2 divided by 2. All right. How do I know that? We'll get into that later. But for right now, the reason I knew this is not only because I know the unit circle, all right, but because there's a pattern that we can follow. All right. Now, also, I know that the sine of pi over 4 is the square root of 2 over 2 as well, because just like x and y appear in alphabetical order, all right, each point can also be defined by its cosine and sine value. All right, your x value is always the cosine of your angle, and the y value is the sine of your angle. All right, the way I remember this, x and y are in alphabetical order, cosine and sine are in alphabetical order. Okay, now, just like before, I showed you a little bit of the unit circle before. This is 0/360 degrees, which is also 0/2 pi radians. And then up here we have 90 degrees, which is pi over 2 radians. 180 degrees, which is pi radians. Down here is 270 degrees, which is 3 pi over 2 radians, and of course back to 2 pi radians. All right. Now, the important thing to remember here, right? The important thing to remember here is sine is your y value. All right, sine on the calculator, it's sin. I still want you to pronounce it sine. I don't want you to say sin. All right, and it is the y value on a unit circle for any angle alpha. All right, it's the y value on the unit circle for any angle alpha. All right, pretty simple to remember, I think. Okay. Now, your cosine. Okay, on the calculator, it's spelled COS. I want you to say cosine, not cos. All right, and this is the x value on a unit circle for any angle alpha. Okay, so remember, cosine is your x value, sine is your y value, and they appear in alphabetical order. X comes first, cosine comes first. Y comes first, y comes second, sine comes second. Okay, so now I also want to give you a few special cases with this unit circle. I'm not going to give them all to you yet. I'm going to reserve that for another video. But I will give you a few special cases, special values, which you're going to need to remember, especially for the upcoming test. All right, here's your special values. All right, I'm going to give you an angle, then I'm going to give you the cosine of that angle and the sine of that angle. All right, you'll want to remember this. You'll want to write this down. If your angle is 0, radians or degrees, doesn't matter. Your cosine will always be 1. Your sine will always be 0. All right, remember the cosine is x and the sine is y. All right, if you have 90 degrees, which remember is also pi over 2. All right, so 90 degrees, well, pi over 2. Your cosine is 0 and your sine is 1. All right, 180 degrees, or pi, you have negative 1, 0. 270, or 3 pi over 2, you're going to have 0, negative 1. And then your full circle, 360, or 2 pi, you're back to 1, 0. Now, you might say, how did you get all those values? All right, here's how I got those values. This is your 0-degree angle right here. All right. So basically, what I'm asking you are, what is the coordinates of that point? Well, it's okay. Well, we know we go x first, so we go over 1, then we go up 0. So the coordinates of this point are 1, comma 0. All right. Remember how I said your cosine came first and your sine is second? All right. So your cosine is 1, and your sine is 0. All right. Now for 90, I did the same thing. X, you don't go anywhere, so that's 0, meaning the cosine of 90 is 0, and then you go up 1. Okay, so this is 0.01. So your cosine of 90 is 0, and your sine of 90 is 1. Did the same thing for 180. You go back 1, so it's negative, and then you don't go anywhere, so it's negative 1, 0. For 270, you don't go anywhere, and then you go down, so it's 0, negative 1. Then, of course, 360 holds the same value as 0 does. All right. So this is what I want you to remember for now of the unit circle. All right, make sure you memorize this. I'm going to fill in these points in a later video. Okay, I'm going to give you some more values that I need you to remember, but I'm also going to show you an easy way to remember them. But for now, make sure you have this drawn in your notes. All right, your unit circle. Make sure you have labeled what I've labeled here. All right, you got your xy value, which is also the cosine of that angle, comma the sine of that angle. All right, make sure you know that this is 0 slash 360 or 0 slash 2 pi, 90 pi over 2, 180 or pi, 270 or 3 pi over 2. Okay, again, remember sine is the y value, cosine is the x value. And remember these 5 special cases. All right. Now, there's one more trig value I want to go over, and that is tangent. All right. Tangent is the TAN button on a calculator. It is pronounced tangent. Please don't say tan. It is tangent. All right. And essentially, the tangent of your point, of your angle, is the slope of the line that goes through that point from the origin. So your tangent is really your slope. Because slope, if you remember, is rise over run, which is y over x, which here is also a point that you're going to need to remember. We'll get more into this later, but you're going to need to remember this. So I'm going to give you a little preview of it. If you remember, y, the y value, is the sine of your angle. So this is sine over and x is cosine. So tangent, in a sense, also equals sine divided by cosine. All right. So tangent, it's the slope of your line. It's rise over run. It's y over x, or sine over cosine. All right, sine over cosine. Now, just so I make sure that you remember sine and cosine. I can't spell, apparently. Remembering sine and cosine. Remember, cosine is your x value. All right, it's your horizontal movement. And of course, horizontal is left-right movement. All right. Sine is your y value. It is your vertical movement. And of course, vertical is up-down movement. And if you remember, they are in alphabetical order. X comes before Y, C comes before S. You can even say H comes before V, and L comes before U. All right, so they are in alphabetical order. All right, X, Y, cosine, sine. Alphabetical order. Remember that, alphabetical order. Now, another thing I want to mention too is when you have your calculators, when you're using your calculators, you need to make sure you're in the correct mode for doing this. If you're using degrees, you need to make sure you're in degree mode. Each calculator is different on changing the modes. So if you have a specific calculator you like to use, ask me tomorrow in class and I will figure out how to change your mode. I will also show you how to change the mode on the TI Inspire. Okay, but you got to make sure you're in the right mode. All right, so the modes of the calculator. If your angles are degrees, how do you recognize if your angle's in degree? If you see the cosine of 60 degrees, you need to be in degree mode. Or it will assume that this is 60. If you were in radian mode, it will assume this is 60 radians. Why? Because you're telling it, since you're in radian mode, what you're telling the calculator is any angle I put in is radians. If you're in degree mode, you're telling the calculator any angle I put in will be in degrees. Because other than telling it what mode to be in, there is no way to distinguish between degrees and radians when you enter them into the calculator. So when you start to do trig, you need to make sure your calculator is in the correct mode for the system you're using. If you're using degrees, you got to make sure you're in degree mode. If you're using radians, you got to make sure you're in radian mode. How do we know if we're using radians? If you see the cosine of pi over 3, you're in radian mode. Normally, if you see pi in your answer, when I say normally, I mean 99.99% of the time. If you see pi in your answer, you are going to be using radian mode. Make sure you change the calculator to radian mode, especially on a test. Same thing for degrees. Make sure you are in degree mode or your answers you get will not make sense and will not be correct. All right, again, like I said, show me your calculator tomorrow and I'll show you how to convert between the modes and show you how to check what mode you're in. So that way you you can be getting the right answers for the problems that you're doing. Now, the good thing with radians is you don't always need a calculator to find your angles. We'll get into that later, but I'm telling you that now. It's kind of a little tidbit for the future. You're going to be able to take the sine and cosine of angles without a calculator because they're really that easy. Okay? So, make sure that you understand this unit circle, the little bit I've given you so far. Make sure you have it written in your notes for tomorrow. And we will start going over some problems involving the unit circle and some trigonometry tomorrow in class. See you tomorrow.